From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. This is Andre Johnson.
Jr.
Do not forget the Jr. It's very important to remember the JR at the end of the name. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, to share, to rate, to review. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And also, hello to the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Glad you have found us here. So thank you for watching. Also, it is Monday. It is Monday today in the city of New Orleans. Kind of a weird day. A little rainy this morning, but feels like it's going to get a little bit better as the day goes on. So hopefully wherever you are, you're doing well. Coming back from a weekend where I just kind of hung out, Andre. I didn't really... I've had some busy weekends over this last little stretch here. So this weekend didn't have a whole lot planned, so I just kind of hung out. But you had a fun weekend ahead?
I did.
Oh, last weekend?
You know, it was my birthday weekend
Happy
last
birthday.
weekend, the big 3-0. I turned 30. Shout out to my family for planning a surprise party, even though I knew about the surprise party. I just kind of pretended I didn't know for the sake of the surprise. But,
Where was it?
It was at Katie's, actually, over there. Me and probably about 20, 25 family members. My sisters flew in from out of state, so it was cool seeing everybody, getting to eat a little bit and all of that. So it was a surprise party. Even though I knew about the surprise, we still said surprise, and we had cake, so it was fun.
How did you find out about the surprise? They just kind of... Somebody just spilled the beans, or you just kind of figured it out?
You just kind of look at the hints, you figure it out.
Yeah.
You could see people around you starting to, hey, what are you doing next weekend?
Right,
Where are you going
right.
to be? So,
I gotcha.
context clues.
Well, happy birthday. 30 is a
Thank
good
you.
age. 30 is a really, really, really good age. All right. So today we were going to get into really go heavy with draft, and we still are this week, but the Saints made a significant move on Friday evening or after we had potted, so we didn't have a chance to pot about this. So we're going to do it today because this player also spoke today. So we're going to go with that, with the big picture. The Saints, of course, signed a former first-round pick. The reunion tour continues with a lot of these guys this offseason. Wide receiver Brandin Cooks.
Yeah, Brandin Cooks, former first-round pick for the Saints, back in black and gold. He talked on Zoom for about 9 minutes earlier today about his return to New Orleans. You know, he says he's learned a lot since leaving here the first time around. He mentioned that, the two teams parting ways was kind of best for both sides involved because you consider the talent that the Saints brought in since he's left and, the games and some of the big stakes games that he's gotten to play and the success that he's had. He's excited to be back. But, Sean, now that Brandin Cooks is back, what, if anything, can he bring to a Saints offense that desperately needs playmakers?
Well, it was kind of a trip down memory lane today. We've done it a couple times this offseason, as I mentioned, when you talk about the guys that played here and also the guys that are from here that signed with the organization. So it's been an interesting offseason, acquisitions of players. So, you walk down memory lane, and first and foremost, I look back to the game, many say sort of solidified his exit, if you will, with that LA Rams game back in 2016. SP wanted to run it up on Greg Williams that day. They put up 49 points, and somehow in the midst of all that domination, I remember it vividly, Cooks didn't touch the ball at all, and he was not happy about it, and famously said, closed mouths don't get fed. It was honestly... It's just a little bit of a side note. It was kind of a sad day, to be honest, that game, because they played the Circle of Life on the speaker system, because it was one of those things to get back at Greg Williams, what goes around comes around. They tried to troll Greg Williams. And honestly, 2016 was not a good year. They finished 7-9, and it was in the midst of a bad season. And the Saints acted like they won the Super Bowl that day. And that win made them 5-6, and they lost the following week to lowly Detroit. But back to the situation at hand. People think that was the reason Brandin Cooks was traded, and it absolutely 100% played a part in the decision to move on from him. But it was one of those trades where he even alluded to it, where both teams benefited. Saints landed Ryan Ramczyk, and if they didn't land Ryan Ramczyk in that draft class, you just wonder, did the resurgence back to the top to the contender status from 17 to 20 would have happened had they not made that deal. It was for a first-round pick. The Patriots got Cooks, and they went to Super Bowl that year. 2017, they lost to the Eagles. I think he got hurt in that game, if I'm not mistaken. Brandin Cooks did. But
I think he got concussed by, was it Malcolm Jenkins?
I think it was. I think you're right. So, were they former teammates? I don't think they overlapped. I don't think they overlapped in New Orleans. Okay, but anyway, That truly was the beginning of, and I was trying to find a way to phrase this that was like just accurately described it, but also didn't come across as overly disrespectful or overly nice or mean or whatever, but it really was the start of teams falling in and out of love with Brandin Cooks. I don't know how else to put it. I can't think of another player that's been traded twice in their career. I'm sure it's happened, but I just can't think of any off the top of my head, especially in the free agent era. And it used to happen all the time back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But before the free agent era, it happened. But since the free agent era, you just don't see that many trades. Brandin Cooks has been traded 4 times. 4 times he's been traded. So clearly there's a want to bring Brandin Cooks in, but there's also a want to get Brandin Cooks out. First traded from Saints to Patriots, 2017. Patriots to Rams, then Rams to Texans, then Texans to Cowboys. This is obviously the first time he's been able to pick his team where he actually got to free agency. I guess along the way of those trades, he signed extensions with those clubs where he never actually touched the free agent market. And this is a player that, I mean, I don't know what you think of him. I never had a problem with him, honestly, when he was here. He was a kind of a soft-spoken guy until he did the closed mouths don't get fed type stuff. But he was a receiver, and, you know, sometimes receivers get angry when they don't get the ball. But he was wildly productive. I mean, that 2016 season, second most in yards of his career. 2015, second highest in receptions of his career. So he had a stretch of 6 1,000-yard seasons over a 7-year span. So it's easy to see why teams love him at first, but clearly they are not afraid to move on from him either. It's a weird dynamic. You get this push-pull, this, I don't want to say love-hate. It's more of in and out of love with Brandin Cooks. But let's obviously tell the truth in this scenario in 2025 with Brandin Cooks and the New Orleans Saints. I'm just going to keep it real. This, when we talked about extra cap space and adding a veteran to the wide receiver room, something that I think they needed, this wasn't the veteran I was envisioning. I was not envisioning Brandin Cooks. Now that he's back, I guess you can make a case for it. He's here. But I was thinking more Keenan Allen. I think you were thinking more Stephon Diggs. Yeah. That was more the veteran receiver we were thinking of, not Brandin Cooks. So honestly, my level of excitement towards this is about a 5. I don't know. It just doesn't like crazy move the needle. I'm not, super disappointed either. It's just kind of okay. Meh. All right. I'm sure he still has a little bit of juice left. In 2023, he scored 8 receiving touchdowns. So he has still been productive, but let's not kid ourselves here. And this is where everyone has to have, okay, let's have a clearly defined vision of what we need and who this player actually is, and hopefully those two sides can merge. He turns 32 years old in September. 32 years old, and this will be his 12th season in the NFL, coming off his least productive season after suffering some kind of a knee injury. Plus, and this is the big one, he has a similar build and a similar skill set to the other 2 receivers on this team, in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Smaller receivers with blazing speed. And to be honest, I'm not sure, truthfully, the Saints had to pay $13 million for Brandin Cooks over 2 years. Maybe it was a leverage thing. Maybe they felt like they was going to sign somewhere else. But I'm not sure $13 million was necessary. If you're going to call Juwan Johnson an overpay, I'm going to say this was probably an overpay. But nonetheless, he is here. Pay him, they did. Maybe Kellen Moore is trying to tell us something with stylistically the type of receiver that he wants. Who knows? But back to the question at hand. What can Brandin Cooks realistically bring to the table? I honestly think the true value of Brandin Cooks, while you bring up Brandin Cooks into the Saints organization, into that wide receiver room, is he brings the floor up. The bottom is not so far down. The bottom now gets raised a little bit. Think of how much the bottom fell out last year when Cooks and Shaheed went down. Not till they got Marquez Valdez-Scantling did it feel like there was any stability at all in that wide receiver room. I mean, there was Cedric Wilson, but it felt like he never got his footing. There was like Dante Pettis. Name some other receivers.
They kept trying to make Mason Tipton happen.
Mason Tipton. I mean, the drop-off was absolutely huge. With Cooks, that drop-off does not go down as far. It comes up, which is a good thing. It increases the overall composite score of the entire wide receiver room. Let's put it that way. So hopefully, and this is where the other half of it comes in. Hopefully, at this point in his career, Cooks understands exactly who he is now. And who he is a 3. He is a 3, borderline 4, or high end, however you want to call it. He is a third receiver at his best. If he has to be anything more than the third receiver right now at the stage of his career, there's probably some deficiencies in your wide receiver room. That's just a fact. When you're 32 years old in the wide receiver room, he needs to embrace that and, frankly, give some guidance to a room. Doesn't it feel like over the last couple seasons it always feels like they've dealt with some issues of maturity? Would you agree with that in that
definitely.
room? It just kind of feels like they dwindle. They lack a little bit of discipline. Need a little bit of maturity. They've battled some injuries. They've had some interesting characters in that room. So hopefully he embraces that. And to be fair, Cooks definitely sounded like he didn't sound like a kid.
Yeah.
He sounded like a well-seasoned pro who's seen the side of the business that very few people get to see. I mean, I just named it. You don't see that many teams trade for one player the way they have for Brandin Cooks. I guess you see it somewhat in other sports, but not so much in the NFL. The last time we spoke to him, I remember, was 2016. He would have been 23 years old at that point. A lot of growth can happen between 23 and 32 years old. And I remember him saying stuff like, I think it was me and Brett Martell just sitting there, just doing a casual in the locker room. I remember him saying something, I'm going to shock the world type quote. Okay. Now, hopefully, he understands. No need to shock the world. He just needs to come in, be a nice veteran, produce, 50 catches, 600 yards, 6 touch, whatever, and just contribute to help the team win. That's all. The days of trying to prove stuff are over. What say you?
It's not as exciting of a, acquisition as it was, over a decade ago, but it's not a bad signing. I give it about a C,
Yeah.
It doesn't make you worse as a team. It doesn't make you worse as a receiver room. That doesn't make you a whole lot better, not necessarily. I mean, he doesn't run faster than Rashid Shaheed. He doesn't run the route tree like Chris Olave. He settles into that number 3 position, but you would think, like you touched on, he can give you more than Cedric Wilson did last year, who was really unable to get any kind of consistent production at the wide receiver position. I think where he really makes this team better is 2 areas in which that receiver room has lacked. Number 1 is depth, because you saw, and you touched on it real quick, when Olave and Shaheed went down. I mean, Mason Tipton, Kevin Austin Jr., Dante Pettis. There were a lot of guys who, Bub Means, but he got hurt. A lot of guys who got an opportunity, but nobody really was able to make a big impact outside of Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So now you have Brandin Cooks there. And outside of depth, he also brings a veteran leadership, because pretty much everybody in that receiver room last year outside of Cedric Wilson was young. I mean, Bub Means was a rookie. Kevin Austin's young. Dante Pettis, I'm sure, is pretty young. Olave's young. Shaheed's young.
I mean, once MVS got there, he brought a little bit of veteran
once MVS got there.
Yeah.
The vet before this was maybe Michael Thomas, and we know he didn't necessarily act like you would want a vet to act most of the time. So I think Brandin Cooks helps your team from a sense of depth, from a sense of bringing a veteran presence. Maybe he can teach a young Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed some things, that you were talking about, some of the things that he's learned since leaving New Orleans. They're kind of in the part of that career where he left New Orleans right now. Right. So maybe he can help them along the way. But honestly, the most interesting part of today, talking to Brandin Cooks, is a part that might get overlooked, and it's a part that we haven't talked about yet, and that's when he said he talked to Derek Carr.
Yeah.
We on this podcast have said, Derek, say something. We know that you weren't here for the Super Bowl, no big deal. You weren't here for Mardi Gras, no big deal. You weren't here when Kellen Moore got signed. Maybe a bit of a deal.
Yeah.
And we were just waiting for Derek Carr to...
I keep checking his social media until give me something.
We're waiting for Derek Carr to do something to make it seem like he is actually the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. And at the bare minimum, him reaching out to a wide receiver that just got signed that he will be throwing to. That's the first time I've heard of Derek Carr having any contact with anybody since the end of the season last year. So, just hearing that Brandin Cooks did at least talk with Derek Carr, that's kind of made my ears perk up and say, okay, well, at least they're in contact. At least Derek, while he's not talking outwardly, he's talking behind the scenes. I'm curious to, some of the conversations that those guys are having, but that is something that jumped out to me in the presser.
Yeah, and he was very complimentary of Carr. They both came out in 2014, both from, he said something about Northern California. I guess Carr lives in Fresno now. He went to Fresno State, so I don't know if they grew up out there or whatever the case may be. He also said Keith Williams is the best wide receiver coach in the NFL. They must have crossed paths a couple times. I think when he was coming up in the draft or whatever the case, or maybe he was a college level recruiting him at some point.
Yeah.
So there were a few tidbits in there, and that's what you get with a veteran, especially a veteran that's kind of survived. I mean, let's be honest. When you make it to year 10, 11, 12, you're in like, okay, I've seen it all mode, and there is an ease when you talk to a veteran versus when you talk to a younger player that's trying to make his mark that I just think comes with maturity. And it sounded like Brandin Cooks has reached that point in his career. I hope he has, because if he has any his days of being a number one are over. I don't know if he ever truly got to number one, but I know he was, that wide receiver core in 2016 was actually pretty good. They had 3,000-yard receivers. They had, Brandin Cooks, Michael Thomas's rookie year, and Willie Snead was the other receiver. He may not have gotten 1,000 yards, but that was a good young receiver core. And I remember thinking that could be something. And obviously, things happened, and the Saints moved on, and that trade really was beneficial for both sides. But New England kind of got rid of him. They were kind of done with him pretty quickly because it would have been his 14 would have been his fourth year. I don't know if they weren't going to re-sign him, but they ended up trading him again. So they only got 1 year out of him and gave the Saints a first-round pick for it.
Right.
So the Saints, both teams benefited, but in the long run, I think the Saints won the trade, especially since the longevity of Ryan, well, I guess wasn't quite as long, but the sustainability with the Saints was obviously longer than the impact Cooks had with the initial team that they traded him to. Right. So,
especially for a first-round pick.
Absolutely. Look, he's here now. I think he's a guy that still has some value. I saw some people dumping all over him like he's a locker room cancer. He really wasn't. It was not a good thing to say after your team won 49-20 or whatever it was to complain about not getting the ball. But it wasn't like he wasn't getting the ball that year. He had over 1,000 yards. Yeah. He had like 78 receptions and like 9 touchdowns that year. If I'm not mistaken, in the season opener, that was a game he had that 9-route, 99-yard touchdown against the Raiders and Derek Carr. I believe it was Derek. Was it Derek Carr? I believe it was. Like, maybe not. I don't know. I think it was Derek Carr. Maybe not. But regardless, he's here now. We'll see how many of these reunion guys sort of pan out. I'm just thinking in my head, how many really have connected on that kind of that last stop on you had Jimmy Graham, who had a little bit of a spark with the touchdown reception.
Like 6 catches, 4 touchdowns, or something like that.
It was like 10 and 7. It was crazy. I remember Roman Harper's last stop didn't work out. Mark Ingram, I'm just saying, by the time he was done that year, it was done. Who else? Like Robert Meacham came back.
Oh yeah,
that didn't work. I'm drawing a blank on other players, but Malcolm Jenkins, I guess, was okay for the year or two he was back. So we'll see. But he's here, and I think he does make the receiver room better. But I still don't think this all of a sudden takes wide receiver off the table for the draft.
Right, and speaking of the draft, you have your first edition of your mock draft coming up in, we're going to say shortly. Maybe you'll see it, before the weekend hits.
Let's not give a firm date yet.
Yeah, but I know you're in the lab working on the first edition of your mock draft.
Yeah.
And as you're working on the mock draft, obviously a lot of talk goes into the early rounds, but you've seen a few guys that could get drafted in those middle rounds that might wind up being some big stars that are kind of being underrated right now. Who are some of the guys that you've seen?
I'm gonna try to do this throughout. First off, if y'all don't understand, like mock drafts, like it's a labor of love because I never feel comfortable with them. I never feel like I got the value right. I put so much research into it, just really more for like where these players will get drafted in. Do I have the grade in the round correct, and do I have The actually easiest thing to me is kind of looking at the skill set. It's figuring out where they properly could go because there's such a fluctuation once you get past that first and really first 2 rounds of where these guys could potentially go. So anyway, in doing the research, and again, I'm going to try to get it by the end of the week, the mock draft, but don't hold me to that yet. I think I got 6 of the 9 picks that I feel pretty good about. I came across a couple of guys that are going to be middle round picks that I think, I don't start with a player and then research. Like kind of the research took me to these guys. I guess the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
And the first player is a guy. We just talked about wide receiver. We talked about Brandin Cooks. We talked about him being another small, fast type receiver. I think they need a big guy. And there's a lot of talk about Ted McMillan, but Ted McMillan is going to be a first-round pick, and he may be available at 9. He may not be at 9. The Saints may not have him graded as high as 9. But this player kind of has a similar skill set, 6'4", 214, highly productive, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. And then I look at the grades. I saw him taking 84th in 1. This is mock draft, kind of just scanning. 84th, 57th, 70, and 72. That's somewhere in the 3rd round, as high as 2nd round. And that is Iowa State wide receiver Jaden Higgins is a guy that I've really I wasn't looking for him, and I just like, wow, this guy may have something here. He's got great. He can line up in the slot. He's mostly lines up on the outside. If you line up in the slot, it's the big slot versus the small slot. It's a different type of route combinations that you run. He was a very, very good red zone target. I wrote down 3 words next to him, this expression 3 times: catch radius, catch radius, catch radius. Yep. He's got a huge catch radius. High points the ball well. His quarterback was okay, but it wasn't like he was like throwing dimes, like well-placed back shoulder fades. There was some plays that he's got to really use the catch radius to make the play. But you could tell they had 2 receivers that really can play. Another receiver is going to get drafted as well, probably ahead of Jaden Higgins. But when I watched him, and then I went back and watched Ted McMillan, I'm like, okay, Ted McMillan is probably going to be graded higher. He's probably deserves to be. There's not a huge drop-off there. And if this guy could be available in the 3rd round, Iowa State wide receiver Jaden Higgins is a guy that I'm starting to really, really like. Have you know anything about him?
Yeah, when you compare him to Ted McMillan, Ted kind of runs routes a little better than him, but Jaden Higgins is actually probably more impressive physically. You mentioned 6'4", 215. He also runs a 4.4.
4.7, yeah.
4.47. When you're 6'4", running a 4.4, that makes your eyebrows raise a little bit. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, like you mentioned, and I think his skill set fits what the Saints need, because whether you look at Olave, Shaheed, now Brandin Cooks, throw in maybe Mason Tipton, throw in Bud Me, like it's a lot of smaller guys. You don't have 6'4", big catch radius, great at making those contested catches, strong guy on the roster right now. A guy like Jaden Higgins that you can maybe grab in the 3rd round, he's somebody who could maybe make an impact very early in his tenure with the Saints, because there's a need for his skill set and what he can do.
And think of the value there. I mean, look, you've got a 3rd-round pick at 71, a 3rd-round pick at 93, a 4th-round pick at 112. Probably wouldn't quite get to 112. But if you can grab a guy in one of those rounds and this guy's an immediate contributor, even if he's not a quote-unquote starter, that's incredible value. This is exactly what you need when you draft. All right, so I think we both like Higgins. The other guy is, I look at the running back position. They need some help.
Yeah.
They need help because Kendre Miller is on his last leg. Kendre Miller has got to prove he still belongs on this roster. Kendre Miller is a guy that this coaching staff didn't draft him. So Kendre Miller is a guy that, you pull for him, but he's got to earn it. So I look at the running back room. They didn't really address it much. I mean, they got Jones, and he was a wide receiver converted to running back. So I still think they need to add, because Alvin Kamara, as good as he is going to turn 30.
Yeah.
He's going to turn 30. So I found a player who you don't see this much. He's very shifty. But for a running back, he's a little tall. He's 6'1". Normally with a tall guy, you see the one cut and go. But this guy's really shifty, got great field vision, been incredibly productive, and it's in the same conference. He's 6'1", 212 pounds. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. It's Kansas State's DJ Giddens. He's got incredible vision, and he's got a different running style than Alvin Kamara, because Alvin Kamara is so smooth. He is so just smooth and slippery, where this guy is a stop, start, change direction, poof, hit the speed, and go. And I just think, Kellen Moore just saw what a dynamic back can do. I mean, they were 32nd in the NFL in pass attempts a season ago, the Eagles were. This is from my former quarterback calling plays.
Yeah.
You know how much a dynamic running back can be your best friend. This guy has got some home run hitting ability. It's not move the change type stuff. This is a guy that can break one for 60. And the grades I saw, 133, 67, 131, which is where the Saints draft, by the way. So you see what I mean by the fluctuation. It's a crazy range. So DJ Giddens is a guy, if you got him in third round, or that second, third round pick that they have at 93, or even the fourth round, DJ Giddens is a guy that, as we close it down here, I think can add some value on your day 2 or early day 3 draft class.
Yeah, he's a big back, but he's got a lot of wiggle to him.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't have as much explosiveness as some other backs in this class, but when you watch him and when you look at the way he runs, he reminds me of Le'Veon Bell. Mm-hmm. Just that patient style of running where it's not Adrian Peterson hit the hole at 30 miles an hour.
Yeah.
He's going to wait, sit behind his blocks, and when he sees the hole, he's through it. And Le'Veon Bell had a lot of success in this league. I'm not saying DJ Giddens is Le'Veon Bell, but I'm saying a back like him with size like that, and you hope durability comes with that, that's something that the Saints need.
Look, I wish we had more time to talk about him, because he's a really good player, highly productive, and that that Big 12 was a fun conference a season ago.
A lot of offense in the Big 12.
There were a lot of offense, and they ran counters and outside zone, inside zone. So anyway, keep those players in mind. For Andre Johnson Jr., I'm Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.